Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. And this week we travel north to Newport, Kentucky to New Riff Distilling, a new riff on an old tradition. And we're meeting with Jay Erisman. Again, if you did not listen to that podcast, make sure you listen to the first one to get the context of all the new stuff and the celebrations that they have going on right now. So sit back and buckle into the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Jay, thanks for joining Scott and I and hosting us here at New Riff Distilling. My first time. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, y'all come back now, Jake. My pleasure. Yeah.
First time,
pleasure.
long time.
First time, long time. How are things with you? I mean, it's been a while. There's been a lot of transition here, right? Ken has, retired and now inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame, which will happen on Tuesday, September 10th, right? I think I did the math right there. And you're still here chugging along. So what's it like to, keep on keeping on with the new team in place and all things New Riff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the story of the distillery writ large. We mature. The whiskey matures and we mature. And it feels like the company has changed 2 or 3 times over since we started, but really it hasn't changed at all. We still have the same ethos, values, the transparency, the doing right by the people. All of those values are still here. Obviously, quality whiskey, bottled in bond, no chill filtration. We didn't discover these things later into our career. We built the place from the cornerstone up with those things in mind. But for those of us who have been here a long time, we look back on those early days, year 1, year 2, as almost a la-la land of just coming into work every day and putting whiskey in barrels and coming back to the next day, putting more whiskey in barrels. And that was literally like the infancy,
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think back that we interviewed you 4 years ago during COVID, and now we're here, and there's those milestones that have happened. Whether that's the 10-year-old headliner that had just has to celebrate the 10 years, or the 8-year-old bourbon, which we'll talk about. And so I think that's what's exciting for me is to see craft, right, and using the technical term, but like a distillery grow and mature to be able to put out products that people enjoy, not only here in the state of Kentucky and across the river in Ohio, but around the country and maybe even around the world. Are you all international? We
are in a couple of Canadian provinces, and we have a man in Britain.
There we go.
We have an English man who brings us to there, and he's also sent a bit into the continent, but not widely around the world yet at all. We'll get there. We're never going to be every place. We're never probably in China, not going to happen. But we'll get to some other joints. We're in 31 states as of today. I think 5 more by the end of the year is in the offing. So and eventually we will be, we think, in 50 states. That's a bit of a surprise to me. I thought we'd be in 40 states, 39 states, but actually we will someday be in all 50. You start to talk to some national entities, hotels, for example, and they say, "We love you. We're in 50 states. Mm-hmm. Ooh, we better be in 50 states." So we're growing. We're growing apace with what we have. We never want to go to a market and not be able to supply them what they need, and so we have deliberately, assiduously moved from place to place around the country.
That makes a lot of sense, Scott. So you were here a couple years ago when we then had 3 podcasters.
Yeah, probably very, very early on in the podcast.
Yeah,
before we were doing remote podcasts like this. This place changed a lot since then. I mean, this whole new space. Mm-hmm. The Aquifer, the bar. I mean, it looks incredible.
The whiskey library,
yeah. I mean, I remember coming in and there was a little cocktail bar right when you walked in the door, and I had sat there and had a few cocktails with my wife one time when we came to Cincinnati. So, it's cool to see this space turn into what it has in relatively short time. 10 years is a long time, but for a distillery, it's kind of a short time.
Well, what's really cool is I was going through before we sat down for the podcast and looking at like, hey, Estes has sent us this and this and this and this and this. And so one shout out to your PR team. Estes does a great job for you all.
We love them.
Keeping us involved and the rest of the whiskey world. But I was kind of looking at like, oh, there's Yellow Leaming. Really like that one. There's I don't know how to say blue claridge.
Blue claridge, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
You got it.
Kentucky in me right there. And then some of the other ones, like more obscure, that you don't think about, revisiting or that. So it's cool to kind of reminisce about, like, hey, I really like that. Like, that's cool that they have a full bottle here. Now I need to go try some.
I was going to say, yeah, if you have not been keeping up with all the limited and special releases from New Riff, just come up here, look at the library, and you'll be shocked. I mean, there's a lot to try.
For sure.
You probably need to come several times, hopefully.
Yeah. And one of the cool things that, and I kind of hit on a few that I like, the yellow leaming and the blue claridge, like, is heirloom grain, right? So before we dive into the actual whiskey, I think that's one of the really unique values of the quality of whiskey that you have created, whether bourbon or rye, or Kentucky single malt, is heirloom grain. So how are you all doing that in a way, or how has those experiments allowed you to widen your eyes to, again, going back to your term, a new riff on an old tradition?
Well, I always wanted us to be able to work with heirloom grain. I'm a member many years of, perhaps you're familiar with the organization Slow Food, and I'm a member of Slow Food Cincinnati, former board member here, and among other things, they care about diversity of flavor, biodiversity, preserving old flavors. And so I always wanted to try and do our part to participate in that. And when we started working with our fantastic corn farmer in Indiana, you know the phrase, you make your own luck. We got lucky that he was growing Balboa and didn't really have anything to do with it, other than it was a cover crop, and so he gave it to us. But you make your own luck when you choose to work with a wonderful farmer, not just the cheapest farmer. So we got Balboa, and that was the linchpin really of a heirloom program, because for a distillery to work with heirloom grains, and for that distillery to be of any kind of size, is really very difficult. It's heirloom grains, when they are preserved and used, most of the time it's a bakery. All the best bakeries in the country, they often use a portion of some heirloom wheats or things like that. That's fine. I mean, a 50-pound bag of red turkey wheat goes a long way. When you are making it. Here in Cincinnati, we have a wonderful local bakery called Blue Oven, and there in Louisville you have Blue Dog, right?
Yeah.
Unrelated, I'm sure. Yeah. And I can assure you they use some heirloom grains in what they do. But they're a bakery. They don't need all that much grain. You know, if they got 1,000 pounds of flour, that might be all they need for a year. I don't know. Well, we need 8,000 pounds of Balboa for a batch of Balboa rye.
Yeah.
And we're not that big of a distillery. This is why you don't see the large distilleries working with heirloom grains, because even if they made the sort of minimum batch they need, that's acres upon acres upon acres of an heirloom grain. So for a distillery to work with heirloom grains is hard. Often you have to start with, I'm picking up here a package of oyster crackers that we use in our tastings to cleanse the palate. And you often start with a package of seeds just about this big, right? And you plant that, and it becomes a crop the size of this table that we're sitting at. And then it becomes the size of a swimming pool. Then the next year it becomes a football field. And the next year after that, finally, maybe you have enough grain to make one batch of whiskey with. Well, that takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years of heirloom grains. And we have continued to make our own luck by searching and partnering with some producers. For example, I called up Blue Oven Bread, my friend there, the founder of it. His name's Mark. And I've known him for years. And I called him up and said, what kind of wheat are you using? I know you guys got some special wheat. And he hooked us up with several thousand pounds of red turkey wheat. And that became one of our heirloom whiskeys. It was red turkey wheated bourbon. Perhaps you remember it. So it's difficult for us to work with those. We have to go to our farmer and say, here, I'm giving you 150 pounds of grain. Go and grow it in a field. And that is how we came to that. You mentioned blue claridge. The blue claridge I scored scored when a farmer in Adams County, Ohio, talked. I was, picking his brain about heirloom grains. He said, "By the way, I got 150 pounds of blue Claridge. Do you want this stuff? It's kind of faded. It sat in the sun. I can't really sell it. It's not that blue. It's perfectly delicious." And so I took it to our farmer, planted it up into a big crop, and that became blue Claridge. So it's a lot of work and takes some dedication to pull that off. And the flavors, I have a phrase I use: when New Riff goes about making a whiskey, we rarely, only in one example, just throw it in a cask to finish it and make a new flavor. We make the whiskey from whole cloth, from the ground up, right? Literally from the seeds in the soil all the way. We are not farmers. We don't call ourselves grain to glass. Lord knows we had enough of a challenge learning how to run a distillery, let alone become farmers. We could not have hoped to do that. But we work very closely with our farmer. We are connected to the farmer. We are connected to the land. And so it's really been a piece of dedication to keep working with these heirloom crops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that sets us up for, the base of a lot of your all's whiskey, which is the Bottled and Bond Bourbon, right? Mm-hmm. It's the flagship offering, I think, would be the best way to say it.
Absolutely, yes. The Bottled and Bond Bourbon and Rye. We literally call them the flagships. Those are the cornerstones.
And it's been a while since I've had one. Have you sipped on this one yet? I mean, I think it's really interesting, that you all go with Bottled and Bond. A lot of your products are bonded, right? Like you've taken that 4-year minimum age statement from the same season, all from the same distillery, yada yada. Scott can recite it. He's got it tattooed on him somewhere, I'm sure, at this point.
Not Bernie.
Bernie does have it. But for the people, why is bonded so important to you all as a distillery?
Well, everybody that makes anything in the world says they're all about quality. From Honda to Chevrolet to any car maker, for example, any whiskey maker. And we say that, and we actually really mean it. And to show how much we mean it, we only make Bottled and Bond. We don't have 80 proof small batch. We don't have, 86 proof 2-year-old or things like this. We committed to Bottled and Bond and we didn't plan it this way from the beginning. As we were figuring out how to bring New Riff to market, internally a discussion happened between myself and our now CEO, Hannah Lowen. And she asked of me one day, should we do a Bottled and Bond? Should we do a Bottled and Bond whiskey? And as we kicked this around, we realized, no, we should not do a Bottled and Bond. We should only do Bottled and Bond, because we recognized then that the Bottled and Bond standard of 1897, all these years later, it's not only the first quality standard for spirits in the world, it's still the highest standard in the world. It's higher than the standards in a great spirits region like cognac. Now, I love cognac. Do you know how much crap you can put in cognac? Caramel color, sugar syrup, oak flavoring, these kind of things. So it is the world's highest standard. We realized if we really do mean it, cross our heart, put our hand on the logo, that quality is number one at New Riff, we simply must. There's no other option than to do everything in Bottled and Bond. And so that's why we embrace it so highly. We embrace it as the quality standard that it always was. For us, it's not just a market segment. It's not just a product to appeal to those mustachioed bartenders who get into Bottled and Bond. And
I can picture them now.
I know, me too, as he said that.
We do it across the board for everything we make. Yeah. Except for those situations where, for example, Silver Grove that we're about to taste, this is not Bottled and Bond because it's barrel proof. Yeah. So when we choose to do a barrel proof product, of course, that can't be bonded.
For sure. And so when people should expect New Riff, right? Like, I'm not going to give my tasting notes, but for you, as you all create and craft these blends, right? Because you're dumping multiple barrels from a season at a time. What can someone expect from a bonded bourbon from New Riff?
Well, the fact that it's Bottled and Bond obviously helps most of all with the proof, and with the age. It has to be at least 4 years old. Now, there's plenty of 4-year-old whiskeys out there. but it helps with the proof. That's probably my favorite part of the bottled and bond regulation. It's the only standard in the world that insists on the strong water, right? On the high proof, high test, 100 proof, where everything else, including the general standard for bourbon and other spirits in America, is 40% alcohol. And bottled and bond's the only standard that insists legally on 100 proof, on 50% ABV. So you get that experience, but bottled and bond also, for us, inhabits very profoundly, if subtly, the message on the back of the bottle. Look there, we have in front of us some bottles of New Riff, and what do they say on the back there, Jake?
A new riff on an old tradition.
A new riff on an old tradition. And that's the rubric, the mantra behind our name. We are a new riff on an old tradition. The old tradition nominally and normally being sour mash whiskey making, but we allow ourselves to do a new riff on it. And I was asking myself at some point, that's all well and good. I love that. But what really is the new riff of our everyday bourbon? What's so different about that? Are we making it with space dust? Are we passing it through crystals? Do we play music in the warehouse? What are we doing that's so different? Because we distill it in a copper column beer still, just like many other distilleries. It's sour mash. The mash bill is pretty high in rye, but there's other people that make that. What's so special about this? And we realized that the way we approach bottled and bond is a new riff on the bottled and bond tradition, and powerfully so. When you read the actual legislation, the black and white law, and this is a legal standard. If we screw this up, I'm going to jail. Yeah. Or at least we're getting fined or something. I don't know. We have set ourselves a legal requirement to live up to the standard that says bonded. So it's a legal black and white definition. In that definition, among other requirements, the federal government states that the spirit, I'm trying to get the exact language here, must be unaltered from the barrel, with the exception of two things. Obviously, you're allowed to add water to bring it down to 100 proof. And the other thing you're allowed to do that changes the spirit from the barrel is you're allowed the phrase that federal government uses is chill proof. You're allowed to chill proof or similar treatments. And what they're referring to is filtration, specifically chill filtration. They call it chill proofing. It is as if you have made the whiskey proof against being chilled. Chill proofing is their terminology, but it means chill filtration. It can also be carbon filtration. It could be diamond filtration. It could be all sorts of things. But in this case, it's chill filtration that they're talking about. Well, the cornerstone of New Riff quality was that we would be an unfiltered whiskey distillery. We didn't know on day zero we would do all this bottled and bond, but we knew on day zero, day -1, that we would be always and forever a no chill filtration distillery. And with that combined with bottled and bond, we lift the bottled and bond standard to an even higher plane, because we don't do the one thing that the federal government allows you to do that changes the whiskey. We don't even do that, So by being bottled and bond without chill filtration, that's a whole phrase in our sensibility. We I don't know other people have done it, but put all those words together. But from our perspective, that's like bottled and bond +2. It's a higher plane of quality for bottled and bond. And we have done a new riff on one of Kentucky's most hallowed traditions, bottled and bond. The Bottled and Bond Act of 1897 came about from Kentuckians, from Kentucky distilleries. Famously, General Taylor, Old Taylor, Edmund Taylor. He's not a general. Edmund Taylor was one of the prime promulgators of this. The person who really pushed bottled and bond into existence was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, John Carlisle, who was a native of and lived in, drum roll please, Covington, Kentucky. Covington, Kentucky, right next door to us here in Newport. So here in northern Kentucky, the home of bottled and bond, we are doing a new riff upon it. And that's a very subtle thing. That's a lot of words, a lot of discussion, a lot of explanation to get people to, if they ever ask, well, what's new about this? It's bottled and bond better than it ever was, lifted to a new standard of quality. I hope other distilleries will embrace bottled and bond without chill filtration. It could become a thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. And it speaks to the level of detail that you all are putting into the whiskey overall. And I say whiskey because your portfolio is more than bourbon, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But as we move down this path, right, the next bourbon that we have in front of us is Silver Grove. It's a straight bourbon whiskey, barrel proof, aged 4 years, 116.2. So we're going to up the proof, 16 points. And this one has a special place in your heart, even with a dusty bottle that you have. So can you, for the listeners, explain a little bit about Silver Grove? And I do want to talk about the tasting notes on this, because from the bonded to this, there's a lot of carryover, but some other things are exacerbated.
So Silver Grove is a really special project to us. It is an annual release. What we're tasting here today is the third annual release. It is many tangents of thought going into this product, really, on about 3 different levels. The first reason we ever did it was that we were building several years ago a new warehouse facility in a little community here in Campbell County, a community called Silver Grove. It's down on the river, it's over the holler and down the dale and around the corner and the bend in the river, and then you get to Silver Grove. It's about 20 minutes from here. And we had a piece of commercial property that we were developing and putting a warehouse on. And today we have a warehouse there, not open to the public, just pure warehouse facility. And so to commemorate this relationship with Silver Grove, and of course they were lovely to work with and very glad to have some investment and tax base and things like that there, the Silver Grove, the village of Silver Grove and us were getting into a great relationship. We wanted to do something nice for them, so we made considered how will we make a product for them, a label for the groundbreaking ceremony. And we can hand out bottles to all of the dignitaries and the mayor and the board of directors, whoever's there in Silver Grove. And so we wanted to come up with something called Silver Grove. So that was one thing. The back of this bottle here states upon it, proceeds from this release will benefit the Silver Grove Community Foundation. So we're doing a solid to our neighbors here in Silver Grove by getting some funding back to them. It was touching. We handed them a check for the first year and said, to the extent of, here you go. This is the benefits for this year. We're curious. What does the Community Foundation do with this money? And they said, well, we never really had any money. So we're taking care of them. I think they've beautified some parks. They handed out some scholarships, things like that. But then what does the label look like? And some of our team, I think Hannah Lowen, had sent to me a picture that she found on the interweb. This antique bottle, 1933, of Silver Grove bourbon. And she asked me, Jay, have you ever seen this label? And I said, Hannah, not only have I seen that bottle, Hannah, I own that bottle. I had acquired this pint called Silver Grove of whiskey from a collector in Los Angeles. And the reason I got it is the third part of the tangent, which is that this whiskey was distilled in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1917. This is a time when my hometown of Cincinnati actually was the country's biggest whiskey mart. The center of the whiskey industry was not in Louisville, not in Bardstown. It was in Cincinnati. This is where the companies were that bottled the whiskey, that sent the whiskey out to the world. So Cincinnati essentially then was the whiskey capital of the country, and we had many distilleries here in town, and this was one of them. So I got a dusty antique of my hometown whiskey, right? By the way, it's delicious. We did make good whiskey back then in Cincinnati. And so I had this bottle, and that informed this label design, which is this antique-y, sepia-toned label. It doesn't mean anything. There is no Silver Grove. It could be anything, Gold Grove, Oak Grove. It's just a name, but it fits so neatly into our relationship with Silver Grove, Kentucky. So this is the third release. Every year we do something a little bit different. The first release was simply a bottled in bond. The second release was 100 proof bottled in bond, but it was Actually, I think that one was barrel proof. It was made with a unique mash bill of 30% malted rye instead of 30% rye. And then for this year, it's again barrel proof. However, for this year's Silver Grove, we have made this out of barrels that sat on the 4th and 5th floor of the warehouse, the top 2 floors of our rick house. And so this is an experiment in an offering of aging conditions in the whiskey. What has happened to it? How does it taste different being from the upper floors? And so it's oakier, if we have a taste now, oakier, hotter in a good way, powerful, more tannic. In absolute terms, I might describe it as a little less balanced than our standard offerings. But it's fun as hell, man. It's great fun to drink this powerful rock'em sock'em, punch you in the gut with oak kind of whiskey. It is barrel proof, and it's a little bit stronger than some of our barrel proof offerings at 116.2.
Yeah.
And for the first year, we released a rye in this collection as well. So it is only sold at the new Riff gift shop. We're not far from much of your listenership. So if they'd like to come and pick up some Silver Grove, try them in the Aquifer Bar, obviously they can easily do so. It's an annual release, a limited release. When it's gone, but we'll have it for quite a while. And the reason it's gift shop only is so that we can capture this funding and get it back to the community foundation there in Silver Grove.
Yeah. What I noticed was there's a line that connects the bottled and bond to the Silver Grove. For me, it's a grapefruit note that's hitting me on the nose and the palate, both. There's like a little bit of bitterness that kind of gives me the strand on both of those. But like you said, I think this one is richer and a little bit off balance. So like where you get more well-roundedness, you're seeing the sharper edges on this one, and it's very confectioner, powdered sugar, caramel, and then there's a nice strawberry note, nose to finish that I got that I extremely enjoyed.
Yeah, I don't know if it's strawberry, but it's definitely like berry cobbler.
Yeah,
it's like cinnamon, but then it's got
very cool.
a lot of that.
I dig where this is going.
Yeah.
That baked like cherry, blackberry, like it tastes like, for you to tell me that this is like a 4-year-old whiskey, that's really surprising. I would think that this is a lot older, but a lot of that's probably like top of the rick house. Like we're getting a lot of that barrel influence that's going to be, more familiar to older whiskeys.
Yeah. Well, and then the back end, I think it drinks bold, like a big bold red wine. Like there's a slight astringency there in a good way that zaps your palate, that wants you to drink more. So your palate can stay wet because it does dry out the tannins you mentioned. But that finish, like I went back and I had just like a little sip left, and it was just like, I had some strawberries this morning and I was like, oh man, that's strawberries. Like, and for me to get like a red berry like that bold for me is kind of hard. But that's what the great thing about tasting whiskey is. What Scott gets, what I get, what Jay gets could all be slightly different, but we're all going to be in the same probably in like sphere of conversation because we're all pulling from different taste memories, sense memories in our mind. So what do you get as you sip this?
I enjoy, like I said, it's a lot of fun to drink. I wouldn't make all of our whiskey this way, but it's really fun to isolate this aging situation on the upper floors. A bottle of this can be a lot of fun, actually, to maybe blend into let's go for a single barrel, or maybe even a couple single barrels that you find of New Riff that have a little bit lower proofs. So we go into the barrel at 110, relatively low and comparatively low to everybody else. 110 proof. 4 years later, if it's in the upper parts of the warehouse, it might go up here to 115, or this bottle is 116. On the lower floors, if it's on the first floor, second floor, it might drop to 107, 108, maybe even 106. Go find a lower proof New Riff single barrel and vat it together in your glass with this. That's a lot of fun. So it's just, like I said, fun to drink. Not what I would want as my desert island whiskey, so to speak, but It's fun. The rye also is, extra lusty, extra powerful. Like I said, hot in a good way.
Yeah, for sure.
So just added a couple drops of water and it just turns into like a brown sugar bomb.
That's totally how, thank you, Scott, I counsel people to drink our whiskey. I've been saying for 20 years, drink your whiskey any way you want, just buy it from me.
Yeah.
But if you will, especially in an unfiltered bottling like New Riff, hit it with a little water and more flavors, different flavors, aromas come out. And of course, it does tamp down the ethanol a little bit.
For sure. No, I think as I've grown and matured in my whiskey.
It matured in whiskey, not in life.
No,
right?
just in whiskey. I think the best thing you can do is own a dropper. Like add one, add two, add a cube, whatever, and experience the different chemical reactions that happen. And as whiskey gets more nerdy, which we got the whiskey nerd conversation tonight. We're going to take a detour here. Instead of keep tasting whiskey is, people want to know the weird nerdy things about things. And so tonight, and then in November, I believe you're going to do the same type of deal. You have the Kentucky Single Malt, which is again a new riff on the tradition of bourbon being America's spirit, right? And we were joking around about the TTB beforehand. But what's it like for you all to put out a single malt whiskey and play with it differently? Because last year's vatting is completely different than this year's vatting.
Gosh, we could talk for the next couple of hours and still not get everything out that is in our single malt project. It is a big hairy monster of a project, and with so many different tangents, 5 mash bills in that whiskey, 6 different cooperage types, blended over 2 years of production, barrel proof, sherry casks, brandy barrels, all sorts of things going into this. And like I said, 5 novel mash bills that have not been done before in Kentucky. For us, it is to go back to, as you just mentioned, a riff on a tradition. It's turning the tradition around, and instead of us doing a riff on Kentucky's sour mash tradition, we turn it around and use Kentucky's sour mash tradition as an interpretive tool, as a lens, really, to go and look at traditions in other whiskey regions, namely Scotland, and also to pull into that the sort of conceptualizing of different barleys. What would different barleys do? Mash bills of beer style mash bills do inside that Kentucky tradition, and so it's if our name clearly is descended from a musical riff, we are playing a musical riff. This is a heavy riff, right? You should make a heavy metal sign with your hand when you pour some New Riff single malt, because it is such a deep take, a deep dive for us also on all of those traditions.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, and I think their tickets are still available for the November one. So you can check out the website. We'll have the link in there to it's the Whisky NRD series, right? I think so. I just want to make sure I was right there. So check out the link in the bio for this. Come up, enjoy evening. We're going to experience it. We're going to do a write-up the week this podcast drops. So we'll tell you all about what you'll get at that time. But for $55, it seems like a hell of a value. But now moving on to our regular scheduling program, and no, we did not get paid to do the ad there. One of my favorite things, and I just poured this because we have Jay is coming on our Patreon group on Monday, September 9th. This will drop the following week to talk about New Riff and the 8-year bourbon. As I poured it and got samples to our Patreon members, this just kind of was like, they did it again. Like this year is just as good as last year from a nose perspective and the flavor perspective. I hadn't even tried it. I felt it. I smelled it, and I was like, I can't drink this early in the morning as I was pouring out samples. So, what's it like to now have 8-year-old bourbon and rye available for you all to play with?
Right. Well, Jake, it's something we've obviously been planning from the start. We wouldn't have any 8-year-old bourbon today if we sold it all when it was 4.
True.
And we probably could have sold it all when it was 4. Ken and I give him credit. I didn't have to twist his arm or convince him we can't sell it all now. From the very beginning, he knew and understood that for us to live up to our stated goal of being one of the world's great small distilleries, however good we did it with 4-year-old bourbon, and we've done it double gold medal winning good. You know, I love hearing all the time people say, I can't believe it's that good for just 4 years old. So we achieved that goal out of the gate, but we knew the real glory is going to lie with older whiskeys that are, to really be in that great whiskey, great distillery discussion, you have to show what you do at an older age. And if there was one thing I wanted from whatever kind of whiskey we made, it was that it would make the old bones, that it would be a bourbon that was successful and balanced and delicious at 8, 12, maybe 15 even, God willing, knocking on the wood, 20 years old. I don't know. And how do you do that? I don't know how to do that. You just have to do the best you can every day with the best ingredients. I give a lot of credit to our water supply. I'm sure that has a lot to do with how New Riff is aging out. But we've been intending all along to have older whiskey. We just didn't know what the age would be. I didn't almost care. You know, we just set it back, and when the time was right, we knew it would come out as an older whiskey. And now it has, 8 years old. We hold back 20 to 30% of everything we make every year. I don't know what other people do, but I think that's pretty generous considering, again, we probably could have sold it all at the age of 4, but we're holding that back. There will be older ages after this 8-year-old. I don't know what those are now. I don't care what they are. There will be older ones as well. And, you know, fingers crossed it gets there. But my favorite part of this 8-year, the bourbon and the rye, at this point, I'm not asking it to taste one way or another. I'm not asking it to, oh, I'm so glad it got sweet, or I'm glad it has such spiciness at 8 years old. I don't care about those specific things. I just want it to be a whiskey that can age out very well. There's a good analogy in here to the aging of wine. Perhaps some of your listeners have, like I do, a wine cellar. You keep some wines at home, and
always
you buy a case of Bordeaux, for example, and you age it a little while. You taste it 10 years after the vintage, and you say to yourself, well, that's ready to drink, and it's time to drink this case, and it's really not going to get much better than this. Or you say, man, this stuff it's delicious at 10, but it's still really firm and wound up, and it's going to need more time. I think this wine could live for 25 years in my basement.
Yeah.
I want to be on the latter half of that. I don't mean a 25-year-old whiskey. I mean a whiskey that ages competently out to those older ages. There are great and hallowed names in Kentucky bourbon that are wonderful names, great whiskeys that don't really age all that well historically past 6 or 7 years old. That you get them out to 8, 9, 10 years old, and they kind of taste like our Silver Grove here. Woody, tannic, overaged. For whatever reason, not all bourbons have what it takes to go that sort of distance. Doesn't mean it's not a good whiskey. It just means it's akin to a Pinot Grigio, to go back to the wine example. I like Pinot Grigio, wonderful wine. Nobody pretends Pinot Grigio needs to live in your cellar for 25 years. Yeah. But you can do that with a Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley, with red wines and so on, Barolo. So we want to be one of those whiskeys that can age out that way. And again, we don't have some silver bullet for if you just do this one thing, you'll get old whiskey properly. You just have to do everything as right as you can. And it starts with that water, I tell you.
Yeah.
So when I taste this 8-year-old, I'm not looking for, is it sweet? Is it spicy? I'm so glad it's got fruit. I don't care about that. When I taste this, it gives me tremendous hope that if it stays on this kind of aging curve, we're going to get out to 10, 11, 12, 15 years. And right now it's showing me it's got the stuffing to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I'm a brownie connoisseur. This is brownies and brown sugar.
No.
Like it's it is the sweet tooth. And so I think, to your point, it can go because it's got the whole earthy herbal side that hasn't even experienced yet. There is some herbalness on the nose. I think you get a little bit of tea, honey kind of notes happening, but like the bitterness is going to round out, I think, in a year or two. So it'll be really fun to see this at 10 or 12 years, because I think that bitterness will come away. You'll get more tannin, oak punch that will balance out a lot of that sweetness. But man, this is brownies in a glass, and I'm like, now I need a brownie a la mode.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking like dark chocolate.
Yeah.
Like less of the cinnamon like that I got on the 4-year. This is more like, seems way more developed. I mean, obviously it's spent twice as long, at least, twice as long in the barrel. So it's going to have some more development, but it's just like dark cocoa.
Yeah. I have found myself loving bitter notes more and more. I think they are kind of the hum that kind of, to speak musically, they're the white noise that can sit underneath a lot of the music or the tasting palette that you may think is off-putting like early on in your like tasting career, but as your palate matures, like those bitter notes are the ones that kind of keep everything on track because everything's moving off of them. And
I get that.
I think it's got a good rhythm to the whiskey palate and the flavor overall.
Yeah, we're very happy with it. They have gotten out here to 8 years without breaking a sweat.
Yeah.
They don't taste a bit overaged, too tannic, anything like that.
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting what you were saying about like some of the more established distilleries. Like you really do catch a whiskey before it turns.
Right.
Like this one's still on the incline.
Yes, still going up.
You're not like, oh, well, we got to get that in the bottle now because next week it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do feel like that. You're like, okay, this is just, it's all tannin.
We definitely are not saying, I guess we should have done it at 6.
Yeah.
This is looking like it'll make it out to a dozen years.
You're enjoying it at 8.
Aplomb.
And you're going to enjoy it at 10. And probably a little bit further than that. Speaking of age, right? There was a big thing that happened this year. 10 years, right? And you all came out the headliner series, right? So, for you, looking at your old job across the parking lot, what's it like for you to say, man, Ken's dream, our dream kind of came together, and 10 years later, we're still going on the up curve?
Yeah, well, there's a lot in that, Jake. There's not a simple or short answer, I suppose. For me personally, it definitely is sort of a dream of a dream. Look, I went to the Party Source, and Ken Lewis and the general manager at the time, John Stiles, agreed. Yeah, you could be the Scotch buyer, the specialty, the fine spirits buyer, manager. You go out and buy the Scotch. That was a dream job. That was amazing. I love that. And this is a dream of a dream. What's the logical step to go to from there? And it turned into this project between Ken and I. He says it was my idea. I know it was his idea because I never went to him and said, Mr. Lewis, you should sell this massively successful debt-free store and put a distillery in the parking lot. I never said that, but he could see that I had a philosophy or an idea about how this could be done almost before I knew I did. And between the two of us, we hatched the plan, I guess. I often use an analogy to these whiskeys maturing and think it's like seeing your kids grow up. And the whole business is like that. As I started off saying, we are maturing, not just the whiskey, but the business, the capabilities of it. Gosh, when I look back, 7-8 years ago, where we were in our headspace to now, I look to the future with, just bated breath to wonder what it'll be like at age 20.
Yeah.
It's been a wild but wonderful ride.
Yeah.
We're happy. We're keeping on, as they say, right?
Well, and it's just so crazy. Like, I feel like, when we started the podcast, it's 6 years ago now, right? But like, you all were infants. And now to like kind of see you all in that space where every place I go, I see new Riff. Like, it's not like old hat. It's old hat to see new Riff everywhere. And I posted this last night about another brand, but oftentimes the traditional offerings, I probably overlook New Riff. And that's not saying that I don't appreciate it, because normally when I go back and taste them, I appreciate them. It's just sometimes you get so used to seeing something, and there's so many new flashy things always thrown in front of you. And you all do some good new flashy things thrown in front of us. You forget about the workhorses like the Bottled and Bond or the single barrel that are readily available in your stores at an affordable price point. Might add you.
$60, yeah.
And I think that's another good thing for a craft distillery. You all aren't like making the consumer just like, you're not fleecing them. You're giving them quality whiskey because of the bonded situation at an affordable price point.
Yeah, I think when your first whiskeys came out, they were what, like $55?
$39.99, the MSRP as it's called. That's down to Ken Lewis, the genius entrepreneurial retailer that he is. Entirely knew how to price, where to price a brand to thrive and succeed. We could easily charge, sell all this whiskey for half the age and twice the money.
For sure.
We could. And people do. And we would get away with it for a little while. But in my career, I could sell someone the, $80 half bottle 2-year-old craft whiskey for $85 one time. They would try it, but I couldn't get the repeat sale. And so I don't want people to buy $85 New Riff once a year in the holidays. I want them to buy $40 New Riff every month. And that's realistic, fair. I won't say it's cheap pricing, but it's fair. What you are getting, 100 proof whiskey made by an independent distillery with a private water supply from pristine grains, no chill filtration, all these things. It's a very fair value proposition. And for what it's worth, Jake, we don't, thank you, but we don't think of ourselves really as a craft distillery. Even though we absolutely were influenced by the craft movement, we wouldn't be here without them. The earliest, murmurs of New Riff were birthed at a distilling conference in 2008, and we just went on from there. So massive credit to all of our friends in those circles. But we consider our peer group much more to be the rest of the Kentucky distilling industry. We have far more in common with Four Roses, for example, than we do a small craft distillery somewhere. With all love and respect to those folks.
Oh, for sure.
We aren't really part of that milieu, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And it's the word craft, right? Like units by volume, right, is so weird. Like, because you can have giant craft and you can have small craft, right? And you poured the 8-year rye, and I've been sniffing the hell out of it.
Oh god. So I guess going off that craft thing, it maybe an interesting point that I've seen like with New Riff is it seems like it's the hometown whiskey of this area, which a lot of the big distillers don't have. And I think that's probably where like Jake's saying like the craft element, because like what we see is like in Columbus, you might have a distillery that's kind of the hometown whiskey. In, Indiana, you might have like the hometown whiskey, like Claremont, Kentucky, all due respect to Jim Beam. I mean, I'm not sure that the people in Claremont are like, that's our hometown whiskey. Like, it's the world's, it's a world's whiskey, but like in certain regions, you can point to a brand and it can represent like an area. And I think that's what I see like with New Riff when I come to Cincinnati, because my wife's family's from Cincinnati. So I pass through here. I got a lot of friends that live in Northern Kentucky. Got a lot of friends that actually live in Cincinnati too, across the river. But a lot of them point to New Riff and they're like, that's the distillery that is in this area.
I certainly hope, Scott, that we are, a hometown favorite, if you will. We are the first distillery in post-prohibition since I think the last one shut down here in the late 50s, maybe, in northern Kentucky proper, meaning the greater Cincinnati part of northern Kentucky. We're not the first distillery in greater Cincinnati. That would go to credit where it's due to Don and Linda Outerson of Woodstone Creek. They're now located in St. Bernard, a incorporated village in Cincinnati, and they were the first craft distillery in Ohio. They got the laws changed.
Yeah.
So we aren't the very first ones there, nor for that matter, the only ones or the first ones operations in northern Kentucky. I have to give a shout out to our friends in Maysville, the Pogue family, who have been running Old Pogue for quite a long time. But we certainly are, the biggest distillery here in the region. And I guess our living into an observation that Ken Lewis made when he's a native of Louisville, and when it came out that he was building this distillery, and a few people asked, well, why wouldn't you come home to Louisville? Why do we locate in Louisville? Or aren't you going to do it in Bardstown? We're the big fish in the small pond up here, so to speak. We would be just another 12,000 barrel a year distillery if we were down in central Kentucky in the so-called Golden Triangle. Those of us here in the Beeline region, as we call it, the offshoot of the Bourbon Trail, we enjoy being the only ones in town, so to speak. Boone County and Pogue and us and Pensive Distillery in Covington. There's a burgeoning yet still small number of distilleries opening up here. Gosh, there's a wonderful one going up, starting operation real soon, I think, if they haven't already, in Augusta. Augusta Distillery. They're going to do power of good for the region. So we're certainly not the only ones here. We are probably the biggest so far. And we've enjoyed that, to be here in this metropolis. It's just like we built the store here, right across the river from a thirsty city.
Yeah, we had to drive through that city to get here. Yeah. That's, to come from Louisville and actually go into Ohio to come back to Kentucky.
We did. And on a side note, I always find it very fascinating that you can see $250 million football players hanging next to a gravel mill practicing football before the game.
We waved.
Yeah, we did. I waved at Joe Burrow and said, good luck, buddy, in your blonde hair.
You could see him from a mile away, though.
You can. He's like Eminem back in their late 90s. But, what's not in the late 90s was new Riff 8-year-old rye whiskey, and that's what we have in our glass right now. And so this is a 95.5 rye whiskey. Mm-hmm. Is all your rye 95.5?
Well, this is our core whiskey recipe: 95% rye, 5% malted rye.
Malted rye, okay.
Malted rye.
So it's 100% rye.
We loosely call it 100% rye, but it's 5% malted rye. It is our riff on that 95% rye tradition, which we learned from our consulting master distiller, Larry Ebersole, who was master distiller many years at the Seagram's plant in Lawrenceburg. He literally is the inventor of the famous 95.5 rye that turned the world on its ear in the early 2000s and redefined rye he's the greatest living rye maker in America.
Well, it's now called Indiana rye.
That's right. That's right. We had the great good fortune to have him as a mentor, a consultant, a sensei, to teach us how to run this place and help design it and everything. So he taught us all the tools of the trade to make a 95% rye, but our riff on that is 5% malted rye. And that is a little bit of a leavening agent. In a few minutes, we're going to taste a different rye mash bill. You asked, is all of our rye 95.5? Well, no, it's not, Jake. We're about to try 100% malted rye. But that 5% malted rye is a little bit of a leavening agent in the rye. So many people say, that are trying a rye for the first time or not fans of rye, or so they think, and they try ours and they say, I haven't liked rye, but I like yours. Well, maybe it's that 5% malted rye that is a softening touch upon the rye, because on paper, 100% rye, this should take the top of your head off with spice, right?
Yeah.
With spicy rye flavors. And it doesn't, let alone at 8 years old. Once again, this has aged out without breaking a sweat to 8 years.
Big time, like orange peel to me.
Yeah.
Like a lot of citrus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's kind of what I had was, it's not orange slice. Like I like those candied orange slices you get at the truck stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For like nothing. And you're like, nah, you're chewing on it for hours. But it is more orange peel because, again, I think that bitterness kind of comes through, and like I know I'm a beaten record, but There's that orange peel bitterness. If you've ever bought bitten orange rind, I've peeled many of oranges that way over time. My first
with your teeth.
the first part of the rind is me like eating it like an apple, and then going from there. But I also like the chocolate notes in this. It's really balanced in the sweet chocolate category. And I like malted rye whiskey. I'm a fan of it. We kind of mentioned this in our pre-conversation, but there's a place out in San Francisco that does 100% malted rye whiskey that I think is really good. We're going to try your all's 100% malted rye whiskey here in a second. And I think it softens rye whiskey in such a way that the cinnamon, the clove, the nutmeg all kind of tampons down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And you get more of the richness and the chocolate and those flavors out of it because, man, 100% rye whiskey is aggressive.
Can be.
It can be in your face. And so I think this is a really nice balance. Like you said, I think it's got some more years left in it. It's got some legs to it at 10, 12 years.
Or if it's not aged correctly,
True.
It could also be like, I just cut my grass for the first time in the spring, and that's what I cannot stand.
So do you all use traditional ricking or do you use palletize?
The answer is yes.
Both. Okay, got it.
So we have a rick house that is 5 stories tall. For example, that's where we get this edition of Silver Grove from the top 2 floors of the rick house. And the construction of that is a little bit different than most rick house warehouses in Kentucky because it's a concrete structure, a concrete shell with a rick built inside it. And the classic way to build a rick house in Kentucky is you build a rick and put cladding, sheet metal around it, and the rick is the structure. And so ours is a little bit different, being that it's a concrete structure. But we also have palletized warehouses. That's what we have going on in Silver Grove. We did all our homework before trying some palletization, and we're well assured by our peers in the industry that it's a completely viable way to store barrels. We have them palletized 6 barrels high. So that's, you start doing the math, hundreds of thousands of pounds of whiskey upon whiskey. And they're not springing leaks. They are doing just fine. Thank you very much. I guess if there was some difference in how they age, I believed it would be a manageable or a tolerable difference. And we're going to get out there and see, but it's a different way to age whiskey. It's a much less expensive way in terms of you don't have to build a rick. You can save on the labor as well.
Yeah.
But a big increase, and we didn't appreciate this at the very beginning, but as we went into it, we thought this is a great reason to go palletized. It's safer. It looks terrifying when somebody is holding literally 2,000 pounds of whiskey barrels 35 feet in the air on a forklift. But that is a safer method to put them away than people rolling barrels all day long, pinching fingers, getting splinters, rolling over somebody's toes. If a barrel gets off the track in the warehouse, in the rick, there's a safety lead with palletization, and that was a good reason to do it too.
That's been my thing. I like palletized warehouses. I think it's easier for y'all to move it around, and like you said, safer. For the life of me, I feel like you get more barrel touch to the liquid. People are like, no. But if you fill that thing from the top, I feel like you got to get more surface area than if the barrel was on the side. I mean, I could be wrong, but
maybe there's like somebody could do the math on that.
The math in my head makes it feel like you get more barrel to liquid touching, but maybe I'm wrong because I feel like you can fill that sucker all the way up if you wanted to.
We actually palletize with the barrels standing up, but they are side bunged.
Side bunged. Okay.
Side bunged.
Interesting.
And that has as much to do with the fact that that's the kind of filler we have.
Gotcha.
And the kind of bottling we have. When a distillery uses what was called a top bung, they do that for a lot of reasons. That's how they fill, but that's also how they bottle. When it comes time to dump those barrels, they leave them on the pallet. They pull out that top bung and they essentially put a hose or a pipe,
a siphon,
that sucks the whiskey out.
Yeah.
is how they get the whiskey out of the barrel. So it never leaves the palate. They don't have to pull the barrel off, lift it up, roll it on its side. They don't do that. They suck the whiskey out the top. And that's a great way to go about it. We don't do that because we also have a rick house.
Yeah.
And so we also store barrels on their side. And when we hold barrels back, they go into the rick house. So happily, it is entirely viable to palletize with a side bung. And we're not having any problems now after several years of doing that. It's
Shout
totally
out to the
viable.
poplar tree.
I know.
Yes, thank you, Poplar Tree.
Those bungs.
Yes, thank you,
That's
Cincinnati.
a lot of pressure.
I think they're called Cincinnati Bung and Stave. There's an old 19th century company on the east side of Cincinnati that supplies us and many people with our bungs, and they are a remnant of that old Cincinnati distilling industry that I mentioned, Cincinnati Bung, and I've met those guys, and they're a great old teeny tiny unknown corner of the bourbon industry.
That was probably like the most nerdy 5-minute segment of the Bourbon Lens I think we've had in a really long time.
Yeah, about the bung.
Just top bung, side bung.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah, that was very awesome.
So we get into the last one, and look, it has me at hello.
I don't think have I had this one yet? You gotta tell me what
I've never had this one.
6-year-old malted rye, the mash bill, 100% malted rye, as it says on the back of the bottle. And by the way, we put, anytime we can, we put the mash bill on the back of the bottle. One of our values, I think I mentioned it at the outset, transparency. We don't keep this a secret. We love interfacing with, communicating with, educating consumers and whiskey lovers about things like our mash bill. Why would we keep it a secret? We put it on the label. So this is 100% malted rye. In order to be a straight malted rye, it only has to be 51%. And this is 100%. There's very few 100% malted ryes made in Kentucky or America today. It's a very expensive grain. It's not the easiest grain to source in volume. We bring it in directly from a maltster in Germany. We bring it in by the container full on a direct import. And that's how we secure a supply of malted rye. So 100% malted rye. When we made this, I didn't have a lot to go on personally of what it would taste like. There was one at that time, malted rye, as far as I knew, made in America, and only one that I'd ever had. It was called Old Potrero from, you mentioned it earlier, San Francisco distillery. One of the very, very first 1 or 2 or 3 so-called craft or micro distilleries in America. And they made Old Potrero, Fritz Maytag from Anchor Steam Brewing. And this is Anchor Distilling, old friends of mine that I used to sell at the store. And that's a cool whiskey. I like it a lot. It's an unusual whiskey. It was at the time, it was quite young. It was aged in used barrels. It didn't really inform what we were going to make in the sour mash column still method. And so I didn't have a lot to go on what this would taste like. And I wondered, man, maybe when you malt the rye grain, what if it gets spicier? What if it goes extra spicy, takes it up to habanero chili, you know? Dude, sign me up for that. I would love that. But that's not what happened. Because as we taste it here, it got soft, elegant, gentle, sophisticated, mellow, sweeter. There's still some rye spice there, but it lands on the tongue with like little cat's feet. You know, it's so delicate. And in time, we came to understand this as a malt whiskey first and a rye whiskey second. It's a whiskey made of malted grains. Doesn't taste like single malt scotch at all, but it has some of the personality. There's a family resemblance there in how it lands on the tongue.
I mean, if this isn't Big Red in a glass with some caramel, I don't know what is. Like,
just a lovely whiskey.
It is.
Is it that? Man.
I mean, this.
So you're thinking like cream soda with a little bit of like fruitiness.
Oh, for sure. And like this could replace my White Castle. So when I'm trying to sober up, I just keep on having the party go.
So for me, like on the nose, this is very like perfumey, like floral. Like I almost get like this is a sensory memory, like honeysuckle, like wild honeysuckle. Just like when you walk into like anywhere near honeysuckle, you just get like a nice lighter note of that. Like that's what this is on the nose. So I didn't really know what to expect when I like jumped into the palate, but it does have a little bit more like caramel than I expected.
Yeah.
Based upon the nose.
Well, so going back to it, there's like this juicy fruit component, like a little bit of banana, a little bit of pineapple, a little bit of that tropical fruit kind of like thing competing in your palate. But I agree, the softening of the whiskey is really nice. It does not have harshness. And I think it was Alicia told me, she's like, "Oh, you don't like rye whiskey? Let me take you to my 6-year-old malted rye." And I was like, "That's a great way."
No, that's what she said.
Yeah,
she
that's what
said
she
that
said.
this is
Alicia, one of our
favorite.
bartenders in the Aquifer, and one of our ambassadors also.
Yeah,
she's like, you got to try this.
Yeah, I was like, well, if we don't try it in the podcast, maybe I'll come have a pour in a minute. But like, this would turn someone on to rye whiskey because it shows you the depth and complexity of it.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly how we suggest it. That if you're one of those people who is new to rye, or you have a friend who doesn't like rye yet, this is the rye whiskey for them. That makes a believer out of them. It's lovely, lovely stuff. It over our career of making it, it has been sometimes a limited thing. We started off making it very fitfully. We made it once in a while. Then we got smart and started making a batch every month. And then we got even more smarter and we made it 3 times a month. We devoted a day's production, which in our language here is 3 batches, 3 batches a month. Instantly, 6 years later, tripled the supply of malted rye. Now it's still a little limited. You can't find it in every store, but if you want malted rye from New Riff, you will find it in your market wherever you are.
So
it's out there and might take a hit at one store or another, or leave a number and tell me when it comes in. There's probably more coming to your market in 2.5, 3 weeks. It's getting out there.
Yeah. So for the nerdy people listening, how big is a batch of New Riff?
Our fermenters are working capacity of 5,300 gallons, and that yields between 12 and 14 barrels usually per batch.
Okay.
So in a day of production, we make 37 to 39 barrels, something like that, 40 barrels. Cool. Some of the recipes are a little higher output. Malted rye actually typically gets 14 to 15 barrels per fermenter because it is a malted grain, and we get such a more thorough conversion of the starch into sugar.
Okay. Just thinking about scope. Scope and scale of the. I mean, even this month, like just featuring different distilleries, it's like
we've grown a lot. We opened New Riff in 2014 with 4 fermenters, and we had plans and room and infrastructure to add 2 more fermenters. And Ken said at the time, he didn't think we'd ever put those in. We had 4 fermenters. That's all we need. And I thought we would put them in, but I thought it would be, year 7, year 8, down the road a little bit.
It was year 2.
Success mode. And it was month 10 when we installed those 2 fermenters, which increased a 50% production increase. And then in January of 2022, please come to New Riff and visit us. You'll see us, and please y'all come and see it. But this is a very constrained site. We have an interstate on one side of us, a parking lot on the other. We can't just infinitely expand the distillery, but we figured out how to squeeze 3 more fermenters into our possible footprint. And so we added 3 more fermenters, commissioned them in January of 22, and that took us up to 9 fermenters. So another 50% increase. That takes us up to 12,000 barrels a year. That may sound like a lot. It's really not at all. There's distilleries in Kentucky make that much in a week. But 12,000 is a lot more than we ever thought of in the initial going. Yeah. And that's why we have to say to ourselves things like, we do need to be in 50 states. Yeah. We will be in a number of foreign countries. We are at a scale, it's not huge, but it's a scale big enough to be nationwide. We are proud members of the Kentucky Distillers Association. This is the guild since the 1880s that has promulgated and protected and lifted up Kentucky bourbon. And many, though not all, of the Kentucky distilleries are members of the KDA. And there's different levels of membership in the KDA. We started at the craft level and we moved up to another level. We're now at what is called the heritage level of membership, which is the highest level of membership. It includes the Jim Beams, the Heaven Hills of the world. We are one of the larger, 15, 17 larger distilleries in the KDA, probably one of the 20 largest distilleries in Kentucky. Yeah, we're going to get around the world and we have our work cut out for us to sell it all and preach the gospel. But we are at a scale, Scott, that exceeds what we thought initially and exceeded it sooner than maybe we thought. In the midst of all that, we are, to go back to these foundational values, we still are everything we started out to be, including an independent family-owned distillery. Ken Lewis, the founder of New Riff and my boss for all these years, the founder of New Riff, his family is the ownership. That's it. There's no investors. There's no venture capital. Yeah. There's no partners. There are loans. We have some loans to pay out.
Let's talk about that now.
There's banks and things, but there's nobody in this conversation saying, you can't sell this. I need this to be 2 years old and $80, and I need my money. And by the way, we have to sell the place to get out.
You need to raise the price and
we are an independent distillery. We don't answer to money changers. We to bean counters. We answer to quality whiskey. We don't have anybody telling us, I need to make more money. Yeah. We only have people telling us, keep making the whiskey the best you can.
Yeah.
So we're an independent
whiskey. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I'm excited for, hopefully it's quicker than 4 years from now, but seeing what happens in the next 2 years, right? Because the whiskey you all are creating today is, I feel like, even just better than it was 2 years ago, right? Like you all, like we've talked about this throughout the conversation, maturing with New Riff, right? Like that's what it is. Like while it's a new riff on an old tradition, it's maturing with New Riff because you all have grown exponentially. The whiskeys you all have put out have garnered a ton of notoriety, but like the flavor profiles, the drinkability of them are amazing. So really appreciate you sitting down and talking with us. I'm excited for tonight as we go to the Whiskey Nerd conversation to unpack the Kentucky Single Malt. Be very specific about that. And
thank you.
Be on the lookout for all that news on the Bourbon Lens here in a couple weeks. But Scott, any parting shots for Jay?
No, I'm excited to be back here. It's my third or fourth visit. I can't really remember, but to see how it's evolved, to see how this place has evolved, it's exciting. And to see, like I've always thought of New Riff as like they keep putting out new stuff. They keep doing it, but at the core, they keep doing consistently good whiskey. They keep putting out good products. So like their 4-year Bottled and Bond or, their Bottled and Bond flagships, just grab a bottle.
Yeah.
$50, like less than $50. It's hard to beat.
Go and enjoy. Jay, we really appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out with us.
My pleasure, dudes.
We look forward to hanging out with you on Monday night and then again at the Bourbon Festival next week. And for everyone else that's listening, we really appreciate you all for hanging on and listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.